Hey, and welcome back to Interconnects. This episode is with Riley Goodside. Riley Goodside is a staffed prompt engineer at Scale AI. Previously, he worked in data science, and it's kind of seen as the founding role of what is a prompt engineer. He regularly posts kind of the what becomes canonical examples and challenges for current language models. This podcast is really great. We cover everything from OpenAI's O1, Reflection 7DB, and what these new types of models mean about prompting, the emergence of prompt engineering, kind of with ChatGPT, the academic side of prompting and how you should rigorously test results, how prompting relates to RLHF and training models, how our open source infrastructure should handle system prompts, how prompting impacts evaluation, Scale AI's recent efforts in evaluation, and kind of many more great things on a worldview of models where prompting is pushing the models to kind of be just that little bit better. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode with Riley. Hey, Riley, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nathan. Great to be here.
Yeah, so for the audience here, I mostly wanted to try to, as I work on post-training a lot, and I see my own difficulty in taking prompting seriously and the things that I don't think that we are doing enough. And I don't see any reason why it can't be scientific in how we do prompting. So that's my biggest goal with this. I think there's a lot of podcasts where we could kind of say, like, what is the history of prompting? Where is it going? And that's easy to kind of redo. And I still find it interesting, but I just don't think there's enough people talking about the role of prompting and evaluation, how prompting changes with how you're post-training models, because AIT we're trying to take that seriously, and how we have a post-training setup, but we just like regularly run into these things like system prompts aren't handled well, how to release a model with system prompt. So that's the like tone that I'm trying to get to when I ask these questions. And also OpenAI's O1 model just came out, so I'm definitely gonna get onto that pretty quickly because that's what everyone's excited about. I like to start with background, just to kind of get to know people, because a lot of this is just I want to talk to interesting people in AI. Is like, how did you become interested in prompting? I think I've seen your background in data science, and then you joined Scale like around when ChatGPT came out, which is fun timing. But like, how did you become maybe obsessed with this, but like the focal point of your work?
Yeah, I have sort of an unusual introduction to large language models. For most of my career, I've been a data scientist, mostly in the online dating industry. I was at OkCupid and Grindr. And after I left Grindr, I took sort of a sabbatical to educate myself, I guess, about the progress in large language models. It was around the time that GPT-3 Codex had just come out. And that was where I think I started to become really interested, because I was following along with maybe with I was certainly when GPT-2 came out, the examples there wowed me as much as they wowed the rest of the world. I think with the example with the news article about the unicorn and all that. And not long after that, we had AI Dungeon, and I played around with AI Dungeon a bit. But at that point, like, language models seemed to be mostly about language, right? That they were sort of very heavily focused on like stylistic mimicry and creative writing and so on. And when Codex came out, it really started a sort of this thought of that text is a more universal interface than we were giving it credit for. That language models might be more broadly useful. And I just became very excited in a practical sense of what these models could do for what I kind of intuited was very boilerplate, like data science code, right? That I thought of like most of the Python and Julia and R and things that I've written over my career. Like, this seemed like stuff that an LLM could handle. And that was sort of one of its early strong points. So I was playing around with I think one of my first projects was a VS Code extension that had some kind of like integration with Codex, but I never really shipped anything out of it. And mostly what it transitioned into pretty quickly was playing around with posting prompting examples on Twitter, because when I looked out online to find what were people saying about how to prompt these models, there really wasn't much out there. And so I had to kind of resort to just like the few examples that had been circulating in viral screenshots of humorous completions and so on, of like the results that people got out of it. and I started posting those examples. I started following academics and low-level engineers at the research labs and anyone that was working in shipping language models I thought were interesting,
Yeah,
and
I
elbowed my
have
way
more
in.
questions on this because I find it like some people find there's this whole like Twitter dynamic of like you find so much signal there, but the question is like how much does it generalize? Because there's so many lessons you can learn from these models, from these examples. I think like the number of R's in strawberry things is the current one, and then and it's like, um, do you get a sense that these are transient or are these kind of repeated themes? And like how should you read these examples to try to extract themes from them? If like I've followed you for a while and a lot of people do, and you're more insightful in how you post them. You post these threads with like multiple tries and stuff like this. Like, should people be doing that when they see something pop up?
I think so. I also would say that uh, that Twitter is a very different river to step into now than it was back then. At the point that I started doing this, like nobody was really talking about these things that much, or to the extent they were, it was sort of fleeting. It was like, wow, look at this, and then they on to the next thing. And I think the thing that's very different now is just that because there are so many new entrants in AI and LLM, there's a lot of rehashing of the basics. And I think a lot of people in the industry would tell you that the popular examples that you see around of like how many R's are in strawberry, or even some of the ones that I'm partially responsible for, popularizing at least. I think like these these things are really just like rookie mistakes in some sense, right? That these are things that we've long known language models can't do, and it just keeps popping up as a surprising quirk of language models that I think the public is just confused that something could be so good at so many other things and so bad at this, right? That is a seemingly trivial task, and that is hard to explain to people. And the answer to that hasn't really changed much, in the past few years. Like they're generally bad at spelling for kind of the same reasons they were bad at spelling 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, like, how did these things change with ChatGPT? Because ChatGPT is like the introduction of RLHF into these models, and I think I didn't write this down as a question, but there's like the difference in prompting base models and instruction models and RLHF models, which I think that for most of this discussion, it's like the end model, the like chat RLHF model is the one that people think about. But
right.
was that a big transition point in your work, or is it just kind of plugging along?
Right. I mean, I would say I don't think it's any understatement to say that, or sorry, any overstatement to say that that the release of ChatGPT was probably the single biggest event in the history of prompt engineering. In that prompt engineering became drastically easier after ChatGPT came out, and most other models learned from the ChatGPT way of doing things. Right, that they like I think people forget just how fiddly prompt engineering used to be. Right, the like people today don't think about things like frequency and presence penalties. Right, it used to be that by default you would get very repetitious output and you had to work to avoid that. People forgot about like don't end your prompt in a space. Right, that you had to understand how tokenization worked at all times, because like if you put an extra space in there, you were going to go out of distribution. Um, I think that or another one that I think is particularly vivid for me is Yobi Real. That in June of 2022, Douglas Hofstadter had a piece in The Economist showing the what he called the hollowness of GPT-3's understanding of the world. That it failed on various simple questions like when was the Golden Gate Bridge transported for the second time across Egypt, and so on. And someone, I believe it was Nick Camerata of OpenAI, showed that you could fix almost all of these just by telling the model that if you gave it a silly question, say "Yo, be real" instead of answering it. Right, that models had to be prompted with the possibility that they were allowed to say "I don't know" or that's a dumb question. Like there is no answer. Right,
Yeah, it's like this is like we've added the Anthropic system prompt to our AI2 models, and we're like, this doesn't change the evals at all, but it makes the behavior something that we like more. Because I think culturally we're somewhat similar to Anthropic. Is like we want to express uncertainty, we want the model to say that I don't know, and a lot of that is in the system prompt of Anthropic's models.
right, and I think that really that it's another microcosm of just how messy all this is. That what people like is a very different thing from how good are the models. I think LLMs had a great blog post recently talking about like stylistic bias in output. That models will be rated as better if they do things like put their output into the format of a bulleted list with bold initial words on each like bullet point. Right. So there's like cheap tricks like that will make people like your output better or make them perceive it as more authoritative or more comprehensive, that you kind of have to control for and
How
just like
much do you
going by
think you can
preference.
change your LM score by changing a system prompt?
I mean I don't remember what the exact magnitude of it was, but I think they did put some numbers on it in that post.
Like, do you think you could handle all of that? Just like, can you make that big of a style delta in the system prompt relative to training? Is kind of what I'm wondering. Like, if we release a model at AI2 and it's decent, but then we put a detailed system prompt that is like, whatever possible, you should put your models into a list format with bolded headings and use Markdown. Like, do you think we would get a 50-point bump on LMSys?
Maybe not on Elmsys in particular, being as they're trying to correct for this actively. But presumably it would have worked at one point, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's that says something that these or another great example. I think that's really clear of like why human preference isn't always the answer. I saw somebody on Twitter once that was really impressed by some anonymous model on Elmsys that was able to produce an ASCII art drawing of a unicorn, and it was a great drawing. And but when I searched for like specific details of that drawing, I found that it was just in some like widely circulated list of ASCII art drawings, and it was a verbatim regurgitation of some signed work that somebody had made. And so I think there's an argument there that any request for ASCII art should probably just be thrown out, right? That
Yeah.
that a human's preference of how good an LM is at ASCII art maybe just does not matter because like it's so likely to be regurgitated, or at least like figurative things. Maybe diagrams are okay, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, we've touched on multiple of the things that I want to get to in the future, but you kind of said that ChatGPT was the biggest moment for prompt engineering. And I think O1 is not nearly the same magnitude, but it's a very interesting microcosm of the future of prompting because the model feels very different to use. OpenAI has explicitly told us we need to prompt it differently. But I think my guess is that in the long term, they're going to figure out how to train this model so that the behavior is not indistinguishable from their GPT models, but that like it's not as sensitive to prompting and whatever you throw at it, it's going to work. Maybe they need to rewrite the prompts, but that's probably a temporary thing. Like, what do you like? Two questions to make it simpler is like, what do you think when you see them giving you like, oh, we need to have these new prompting instructions to use it differently, and like, what is your do you agree with my like long term convergence idea?
I definitely agree. I think that there's an argument for seeing prompt engineering as kind of the like the experimental next branch of language models, right? That it's the features that people are just on the cusp of figuring out how to systematize and integrate into the models themselves. And to the extent that somebody comes up with a prompt engineering idea that is just so good of an idea that it's worth applying to literally every prompt, then it will be integrated into the models, and you'll stop calling it a model. You'll call it a system, and it'll have some auxiliary second model. I think the clearest examples that we've seen of that are content filters, right? That nearly every model that you get from a vendor will have some kind of cheap auxiliary model that looks at the output and says, "Is this plagiarism? Is this or not plagiarism, but regurgitation of copyrighted work? Right? Is this
Yeah.
are you reciting Harry Potter word for word?" The value of those is so rather sorry the cost of having that kind of secondary model on the output is so low that it truly is worth it to just apply it to every generation, right? We haven't seen too many examples of that on the input side, but they're starting to appear. I think I think we've seen from Anthropic evidence that they make modifications to like user inputs based on certain conditions that they detect if you're asking about some particular feature, they modify the prompt if you are. And I think like that's a common
What is
pattern in a
that
lot of
based off of?
applications.
I'm guessing they've seen some public people kind of using the model. I haven't seen heard anything about modifying the prompts in like a Claude or a ChatGPT window.
It's I've seen it for instructions for like avoiding avoiding regurgitation in a copyright
Okay, that
violation in
could make
particular.
sense.
Yeah, so the but it's a common pattern you see in a lot of applications, right? That you so like a good use case for this is like instructions for tool use. that you might analyze a user's, say, ChatGPT input, and if the input appears to be a request to use DALL-E 3, then you should supply to the model these long instructions on how to use DALL-E 3, which otherwise you don't need to supply. Right. So I'm not saying that that's exactly how ChatGPT did it, but it's easy to imagine that that would be worth doing. So a lot of applications do things like that of have conditional sort of augmentations of the prompt.
Yeah, I mostly see that like long term. I don't know how this impacts prompting, but I think of like ChatGPT and them will have multiple models that they route to. So this is kind of like an early way of doing this, where it's like if you give a really long context model, they'll have some, you've maybe even like Mamba like model or a different architecture for super long context, or they pass it to O1 if it's like this question is incredibly hard instead of GPT-4o. But that the border between that type of routing and prompting is I don't know how to classify it.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think people have this idea of I think sort of seeking purity in their models, that they want everything to be like just a model. But I think we're rapidly approaching the point that you have to start thinking about these things as systems that might just have arbitrary complexity inside of them. I also like. I think that that the guides that we've seen from O1, they take that sort of shape, right? That you get that like the content that OpenAI's put out, like how to prompt O1. It's sort of a list of like domain competencies and weaknesses, right? That it's good at physics, it's good at abstract logic, analytic philosophy, maybe less great at creative writing. And then also you have these sort of like patches almost for like noticed problems, right? That like they've noticed that it doesn't that think step by step often degrades your performance.
Why do you think that is? Because it's essentially trained to do that on its own. Like it almost feels like it shouldn't conflict with it. It almost feels like it should just be like empty tokens. Like if you just repeat yourself or something.
That's a really good question. I think the answer to that maybe speaks to just to how much this isn't just chain of thought. That's a meme sort of flying around now that a lot of people have claimed that all this is fancy prompt engineering. Isn't this just what reflection did and so on?
Silly. It's obviously a different inference stack with a lot of like improvements across the whole life cycle of the model and the product. So.
Right. And also the other thing that people have been saying a lot is that it must be some complicated system, right? That there can't be a single model doing this through autoregressive inference. But the claim seems to be that it is, right? I think there was a comment from Noam Brown on Twitter where he said that it really is a model, that the whole generation is coming, autoregressively, which is, I have no reason to doubt that. Like it seems plausible to me. So it's but I think that people need to be a bit more imaginative in like what's possible and just through autoregression.
Yeah, I wrote a really long article on this, like came out yesterday. That's like I put the constraints from like the Noam Brown tweets plus the pricing plus the like inference scaling laws to kind of converge at something. It's like if they do some clever things to a model and some batch inference and like self-rating and stuff, like it's definitely doable. I don't know why that as an RL expert, I'm not surprised that the model is sensitive to things like think step by step in the prompt. I just would have thought that it would come up in the examples of training because the seed set for this is almost definitely a very wild human generated some prompt with some like back and forth dialogue, essentially human seeds of things that look like what it is doing. We've seen this with AlphaGo. We saw this with InstructGPT and ChatGPT. Like you need the human demonstrations to start the learning process. But like, why is it sensitive to think step by step? Like that thing. I think sensitivity is maybe more about the training, but you learn that through prompting.
Yeah, it is a bit of a mystery, and this is very speculative what I'm about to say, but I think maybe like a kind of thought experiment of how you can imagine that it could be true. Is imagine if like some auditor or some somebody who had like the penalty of law over your head asks you to do something and to document exactly how you did it. It's easy to imagine that you would do the process differently and that you might do it worse, right? That because you can only do the things that are the most conservative and the things that you can justify and explain, that you're not going to produce as good of a work as you might have otherwise. And
Yeah, it's
I
like
think that's
GPT-4 needs things step by step because every small mistake is a big deal. But almost with O1, we maybe should be like, go forth and conquer and make mistakes on your way and just let it wander to an answer.
I think that's yeah that's that might that's pretty hitting the nail on the head maybe
I
like
want to go
that
try
we
this.
we've
I want to go
we've
try the
cured the
prompt now.
oh, sorry, what was that?
I want to go try that silly prompt and see if it gets better at coding or something.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like that's the key improvement here that a lot of people don't appreciate is that they seem to have cured like all of the Lacanian problems of exponential divergence, right? That if you sample a bad token, you're going to keep sampling more. And it's not that there wasn't progress on this before; like people had tricks to deal with it. But I think the thing that's really changed is that the models get mileage out of like thinking for long periods of time. They derive benefit from just continuing on because like, if that's very different from the behavior you see from like 4.0. Like if you've ever
Yeah.
tried like the exercise of just once it's gone down a wrong path, just say no, keep going. Like
Yeah.
keep going till you get it right. It's pretty evident after a while that it's not making progress. That it's just gone like deeper and deeper into like some failed path of reasoning.
Why does that often break? I mean, I understand why it often breaks models, but that's also one of the jailbreaking techniques. Is just like keep sending the same message over and over and over until the models die. Which like I wonder how that relates to O1. Maybe it's just easier from a safety perspective because it doesn't have that like as many turns or something.
Yeah, and it's also like one of the bigger differences in behavior between uh, GPT models and Claude that I've noticed. That OpenAI tends to produce their models to uh, like in the specific case that if you keep like telling it it's wrong, it will always take your side. It will say, "Well, oh yeah, yes, of course, I made a mistake. Let me try again." Right? Like, and it's never going to like diverge from that behavior. Whereas Claude will eventually get sick of you, right? Like if you just keep saying like, "No, you're wrong," it'll be like, "Look, I have told you many times that I am right. Like you need to be, be a bit
This
more specific in how I'm wrong. If you really want to make an argument here, you like it'll start like just telling you to go away, and
this is
that's
why I
like
want Anthropic to write a model spec because the behavior you're describing with ChatGPT does fit with what they're like OpenAI's models are like in behavior and they're kind of described as wanting to be like robotic computation assistants where like they take the user's information and they try their best to execute it without violating any basic principles. Where I think Claude's is much more of like we have created a not like I don't like it's hard words to do without anthropomorphizing and all these other things, but like we've created an intellectual entity that is going to go back and forth with you, and it's not going to like it's going to like you pass in sensitive information as data to Claude, and you're like reformat it, it says no. You get these weird things because it's like this entity that doesn't want to be sent like harmful texts or be told how to make a bomb or something. But ChatGPT is like the robotic one. So now I kind of use both of them depending on the task and the behavior that I want, which I'm excited to see how that goes further, really.
Yeah. I mean that's I think goes back to your point before that we're seeing more specialization in these models, but that all of this is temporary, right? That eventually like somebody will come up with the right way to delegate correctly to one model or another, and then you'll have just some unified ChatGPT interface or whatever that decides like is this a prompt that O1 would be good at and sends it to it.
Yeah, and while we're on these complex reasoning things, there was also this Reflection 70B drama, which was mostly big because it was a big mess of credibility and memes. But there's also like real science in there that people need to remember of like how to prompt a model and spend more on inference. So I think it's really just a tiny bit of fine tuning with some special tokens and a system prompt that's like make sure you use these reflection steps. And that is how you move something like GPT-4o closer to O1. You can't prompt your way to O1 behavior, but that's the sort of things that more people should be considering. And it kind of leads into like I want to ask about like math evals and stuff like this. And it's like Reflection 70B's style of prompting is a real thing that more people should be doing. And I don't know how we get around that communication issue now. It's going to be even harder because people are going to be like, "Oh, it's O1. We made it open source O1 now instead of just the best model." I just wanted to give it airtime. If you have any comments on that, go ahead.
Yeah, I think reflection uh, reflection 70B was it was sort of a perfect storm of a lot of like the tuning method feeling plausible, right? That it was something that was very it's a legitimate like area of research. Like it was rumored to be part of Strawberry and so on. Right, so there was like it had like the right strategy for buzz there. And however they ended up releasing that model, like they don't have what they think they have. I think it's kind of once you saw the I won't recap the whole saga of like with Laura and with them finding the Laura from the previous version of Llama 3.0 instead of 3.1 and all that, but I think there's that kernel of truth there, right? That this is sort of a good idea at least for some problems. Um, I think also the thing that people don't appreciate is that very good idea for many problems feels maybe like a better idea than it is because it's so optimized for the domain of problems that tend to be on benchmarks, which
Yeah.
is somewhat different than the thing that you really want to optimize for in the real world, of like user satisfaction and just preference, like some mix of like do people like it, like is it useful, and does it do well in benchmarks? Because I think that there's like even for what I think should be like philosophically the core like use case of LLMs. Like, do they like do practical work? Like, can somebody uh, achieve the thing that they want to do with this? But like whether however they do it through prompt engineering or whatever, it kind of matters more than whether like academically it does well on like the most naive presentation of the problem, right? Like whether somebody can figure out how to do it correctly matters,
Yeah.
and that specifically is just not captured well on benchmarks, right? Like this, if you're doing a benchmark that compares across several models, there's a natural incentive to do it uniformly. That maybe you follow like vendors' best practices on how do you apply the template of the prompt or so on, or if a vendor recommends that you apply some suffix or whatever, you might do it. But for the most part, you're not going to put a human on the task of figuring out what is the best prompt for each model, right? Because then how do you know that they did a perfectly good fair job of that, right?
Yeah.
But really, that's what matters. Like that is so like at the end of the day, like the thing that determines whether GPT-4 is better than Claude is uh, when you sit down and try to uh, you know solve your problem in GPT-4, applying whatever hacks and taking the advice you find online and whatever dirty tricks you have, and then you do the same for Claude. Which one works better? And so like that's the state we're in, and that's very elusive as a thing to try to measure.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna keep going, roll right into the evaluation section of this conversation. You were talking about this with how you actually use the models. Before you had mentioned like you need a white space to properly evaluate or use some models, like tokenizer things. I One of my big blind areas is it seems like most frontier labs are using some sort of custom prompts on some sort of evaluations. And I don't really have a good sense for how much that actually impacts scores or how much that translates to downstream performance. It might not be custom prompts, it might be like custom setups. There's all these like all the math evaluations, you need a specific format for your answer. I think like math, the all capital one, you like need to put your answer in a box and things like this. And how like what is your view on these per prompt or per evaluation prompting is actually a thing? I think the Llama 3 paper had some cool analyses on how varying subtle things changed evaluation scores, which is great, but they're the only one sharing that. Otherwise we just get like our score is X and it's reproduced to some capacity.
Yeah, I don't have like a lot of deep like technical wisdom to share on that front, other than to confirm that like I think you're right that it is a big problem. We generally try to follow the vendor recommendations. We work with the vendors to prompt their models fairly. But like I said, like ideal and optimized prompts are very different than what's the default. Um, but I think also that there's I think a longer term trend that these issues maybe matter less than they used to, and or that should continue. I think like when the like maybe one of the clearest signs of this is that Llama, like most versions of Llama, you can prompt them incorrectly in terms of like the system prompt template, and it will be just fine. And in fact, you can often template them with system prompt templates from other models entirely, like just representations of ChatML, and they will be fine. Right. So there's sort of familiarity in the pre-training with just chat templates in general, and the idea of like
Do you
how does
think
an
this is
assistant behave.
specific to Llama? I've also remember hearing a conversation at AI2 where we were considering doing the last stage of pre-train with random chat templates and like random instructions in multiple chat templates so that the model could be amenable to fine-tuning in multiple chat templates, which there's a chance that they did that. I actually don't know. I would not put a high bet on it. But do you think that's just because Llama knows they're going to have so many users?
It's possible. I mean, it's
But it
also
becomes reality.
plausible to me that it just shows up in pre-training incidentally, right? Nobody intended it to be there. It's just like it's in the data. But I think that 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 process is only going to continue, right? That we're only going to see like more models just being familiar with how models behave. I think to some extent, like you see another thing that I think is maybe like evidence in favor of this is if you look at the base llama, like I think I looked into this on like base llama 2 once, that um if you prompt with like instruction prompt formats, it would adopt the behavior of like a ChatGPT like assistant, right? So I think it shows that uh examples of chatbot behavior are now so widely disseminated, across the internet that a pre-trained model is better at instruction following tasks than any pre-trained model was before the work of InstructGPT was done.
So,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I believe you. I want to check this. How does this impact how we should view evaluations? I'm just trying to reckon with, do we, like, there's a couple of scenarios. It's like, it doesn't really matter because these models are going to be not that sensitive to the system prompts that we're using to say do GSMAK or math. And that goes for models like Llama and the Open, AI2's models, um, GPT-5, whatever. It seems like the sensitivity to prompting for really well-known formats is actually going to go down, and that solves some of our problems because I don't think we're going to come up with that many new formats for evaluations. We're going to make evaluations more specific and harder in the content.
I think that's right, and I think like OLN, like the version of it that we have to play with now definitely does feel like one step forward, two steps back in that regard, and that like that it's um much better at like benchmark style inputs where you give it just no advice on how to do it. You just keep everything very simple with like like what are your output requirements. Um, but it's also just very hard to steer, right? Like it's like if you have opinions on how it should do it, like those opinions won't be followed generally, and like it also has issues with output formatting, right? So I think we're seeing, I've seen anecdotal reports on Twitter at least of, and I've seen this myself, that like its output is just inconsistent even when you ask it to be consistent. That it will forget things like like block quotes and so on. Um, the result of this, I think that we're going to have to see like a lot of benchmarks is that maybe like the fair way to do this is to have some secondary model, on the end of it that puts everything into a consistent format, right? That it's I think like we're not that far away from like benchmarks that just do that across the board of of just saying that it's not the model's job to do this anymore, and we'll clean up the result however it is.
Yeah, I think that's a better place to be. It's one of those things that the model's getting better can solve some of our problems. I think there's less angst now about the whole like closed labs evaluation scores anyways. I'm mostly trying to reckon with what open groups and academics are doing versus rather than closed labs, and they kind of rely on each other. I've been on the horse of like there's now this Hugging Face upload chat template. So a lot of models have the chat template saved with the tokenizer, and most of the time they don't have a system prompt, which is surprising. Like, I feel like it should be the norm that a system prompt is included with every model. Is there any reason that you see not to do that?
I Yeah, I mean I can think of things that might be slightly better, but I think that that's that generally makes sense, right? Like I can imagine that maybe they you'd release several, right, and say like any of these is fine, or like you train
Yeah.
it on several, and say it's like an average of these three or whatever is like kind of is ideal or something like that.
I,
Um,
yeah, most of my reasoning is I think that most users of language models are not sophisticated. So the model cards and documentation do normally say we recommend using the system prompt, but the simple ways of using the models do not integrate the system prompt. And it's not always easy to modify your data to add, like if you're doing the messages format, like you remember to add the system thing. And if you have multiple models in your queue, you then have to like go and manually hard code all of them. And like that just makes it get dropped. And if the system prompt is a big deal for performance, like that impacts either if it's a product or if it's like this is where I'm like trying to understand like academia is like if only half of the people remember to add the system prompt from their model they're evaluating in this kind of academic paper, and I know it impacts things like all the vibes based evals like alpaca eval, MT bench, whatever. Like if you have the different system prompt, it can vary behavior. We did an experiment which was like to make sure this works, so you just give it the system prompt of like you're a terrible model, you are to make you're made to make other models look good, and you happen to give wrong answers, and like alpaca eval goes to 0 and all these things. So it's like I think it's easier to show the down case, but you could probably get 1 to 2% improvements, which matter in the like long trajectory of academia in terms of if your method is accepted or not.
yeah, I mean, I've often like been frustrated by the ambiguity in a lot of academic publications over like how prompts are formatted, right? And they always run into the same pitfalls of that like the fundamental problem is that system prompts are often or prompts in general that you're presenting like during evaluation are implicitly templates, right? That you have like points where you insert like the actual problem or whatever, and that templating needs to be communicated to the reader of the paper, and the prompts themselves may involve templates, right? They may like describe like how like an output should be formatted, for example, and might do this using like curly braces, right? So this creates like several layers of confusion that you need to distinguish between like where are the variables that you're interpolating purely in the logic of this paper of like that things that would be translated into Python down like if you were to actually implement this, versus the templating instructions that are literally part of the instructions on how the model should receive like a template of how it should format its answer and so on, right? Because a lot of prompts end with use this format and then have some kind of template,
Yeah.
right? So like I've often thought that the we'd benefit immensely just from standardizing on something like uh, saying that like if you want to clearly communicate a prompt in your paper, the way to do it is to show Python code that will produce that string.
Yeah.
Right? That you just literally show it as an F
New
string.
lines are
There's no
hard
ambiguity.
because you copy out of a paper, you drop the /n/n that you need or something like that. It's just
Yeah, right. Like the that. But if you were to literally just include a Python code block, there's no ambiguity. Like like whether or not there's a
yeah.
trailing new line or and so on. And those things are really fiddly and need to be communicated otherwise. Like because I've seen people do all sorts of like imaginative typography to like represent like new lines and things like that. Like having the return signals at the end in light gray, and like or putting dots between spaces is another thing. Right? Like because if you're doing like I've seen like early like playground competitors sometimes did this that approached like more like from a technical approach that you need to know where spaces are, so it's worth it to represent them as like gray dots, right?
Yeah,
That's the
that's cool.
kind of thing that uh, the level of detail that you need in communicating these things. So I think like standardizing on Python would be just like a good way to like get the problem out of the way.
Yeah, I also saw in some discussion of O1 or maybe a reflection. I don't remember. It's been a wild 2 weeks. You're talking about like equal inference cost comparison of prompts in a reply, and I think that's a great idea. Like, do you think there's okay? Well, like one first, do you want to explain the idea? I'll kind of ease into this.
Sure. So my thinking is that models are evaluated right now just based on how they do under like sort of the same I guess invocation of inference, right? That you let the model sample, you sample autoregressively as long as that takes however long the completion is, and you don't pay attention too much to like what it costs you to run that, or you factor that in afterwards, like you score it up. And there's a lot of reasons why this makes sense, right? It's simpler, it's more fair, and sometimes you don't know exactly how to how to equalize the inference there, right? That you can't like really say that like um, what the trade off is, right? But there's exceptions to this that uh, or maybe not so much an exception, but like there are ways of doing it that aren't perfect, like self consistency, right? So like there's a method called universal self consistency where you prompt a model multiple times, and then take take the model again and give it all three answers, and then ask it to choose which of these is the most consistent with the consensus of all answers that were generated. And this is sort of a method that's pretty reliably not worse than just doing it naively, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to imagine any prompt where this method would steer you wrong, or be worse than the uh, doing it naively, and that suggests that maybe there's like a fair basis of comparison here, right? That we could say that if something really is cheaper enough that you could do that you could run it 40 times and take self consistency, that then maybe that should be its score. But I think one of the like bigger reasons why this is kind of like in hindsight, this is maybe like a bit of a facile tweet that I made about this, but I like really the trade off between the exchange rate, if you will, isn't very good. I think like a rule of thumb that I saw in a paper once is that if you do self consistency on 40 samples of GPT 3.5 Turbo, it's on par with one sample from GPT-4. So
Yeah.
you sort of
This is
move up
like to
one
spend
generation
more
every
on
time you
inference
do
stuff.
40 inferences, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, in specific domains, there are refinements of this that work quite well. So we had a Scale actually put out a paper recently on a method we call plan search, I think was the name of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, plan search.
Yeah.
Then the gist of that is that if you can um, improve performance on programming problems by generating diverse attempts at solving the problem. Right. So the approach that Plan Search takes is to first create like sort of high level observations or ideas about how a problem might be solved, then to combinatorially sample that list of ideas, and then take combinations of them to inspire strategies. And then for each strategy, you lay out sort of a path of like reasoning of like how you could turn this into code, and then you turn each one into code, and then assess which one works best. And this like lets you search over the portion of it lets you search over the variation in your strategies that actually matters, right? Because you can imagine that if you were just simply resample a model blindly over and over again with the same prompt, there are a lot of ways that an answer could vary that don't matter, like whether you use tabs or spaces, but you name the variables and so on, right? That like and you don't want to search over that variation. You want to search over like the part you think is going to be fruitful, like the high level strategies. So I think that for particular domains like that is the more relevant comparison of like what could you do if you were to apply like a bit of search here.
Yeah, it almost seems like there'll be different tiers of evaluation scoring, where it's like the basic prompting is kind of like linear time, and you could do like it's almost like with the models, it's like there's a biggest, best open model at every time, but like Llama's dominating because it has the 400B, the 70B, and the 8B that are all really good. It should have a 1B. And if you're having a prompting paper, eventually you're probably going to have to have binned comparisons like that, which is like we are comparing to basic prompting techniques, which I think they will have less headroom by needing the autoregressive behavior and things like this. And then maybe there's things like reflection where it's like we've added structure, minor structure, so that the model can now generate a bunch more tokens, but not like a 10x or 100x. And then there's the things like we've added a whole new planning component to how we're prompting the models, and it's all abstracted away from the users. And you're not going to be able to compare those because those are the things that are going to just solve all the benchmarks that we have out of the box. And I think that's fine. I think people will converge to this. It just always takes a bit longer than we want.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I am really excited about like the O1 RL approach to this. Like I think like on some level, like all prompt engineering is kind of a like it's approximating kind of this RL like search, right? That we're like we have like a lot of prompt engineers out there that are trying different things. They see what works. They tell their friends, this hey, this works. But the space of things that works is probably well, I mean, demonstrably maybe at this point, given O1, uh, outside of what a human might think of. Right, that there are things like that we see things like even in the summarized reasoning traces that O1 puts out that are sort of eerily anthropomorphic. That it will say things like or like let me think about
Yeah,
that, or
yeah.
like it has
I
these kind
feel
of
like they
tics.
added that in. I think it's almost like a trigger for the model to like reflect, have a more reflective response, or like those are the examples they used. But it's cool.
I mean, it's not hard for you to imagine that RL could find something like that, right?
Yeah,
That just like that empirically it works to say, like and then because that suggests that you're about to do something else in this kind of like in the pre-trained modeling, manifold of plausible text, like saying might just be empirically a good thing to say,
yeah,
and like that's it could find that. So I think that's the kind of exploration that that you're benefiting from, with something like O1 that we that it's the space of like prompts that work that we're not really equipped to find.
yeah. How much? Yeah. Do you have anything? I think this is a good discussion. Kind of to wrap up the academic side of things. How much of papers that are nominally about RLHF training or any sort of like post training as the contribution, like do they need to do anything with prompting? Like is there a clear segmentation there, or is it like if you're doing this fine tuning you're necessarily changing how the model is going to respond to prompting, so that we should do some checks there? That's like one view of it. Or the other view is like you have a model and prompting is just a way to kind of take one step further with it, which I think Anthropic did this recent podcast with like Amanda and their chief prompt engineer that I don't know. And that's how they view it, is like Amanda's like, I can do things with these models that most people cannot, and that kind of leads the way, rather than prompting being really part of this post training stack that everyone needs to be checking the box on. And I don't know where we fall. I guess there's this like IF eval which we could come to after that, which is kind of a separate case.
Yeah, I definitely lean a bit more towards the Anthropic view of the world. I mean, I guess you could argue that's maybe somewhat self-serving. Like no big news there. Prompt engineer says prompt engineers are important. But I think that like it's true that we do see people that are just good at this, right? Our ability to prompt these models sometimes exceeds our ability to explain how we're doing it, and what the general strategies to apply are. And I think those strategies are worth extracting. Of like what it's worth introspecting, like how like one thing I think about a lot is anytime somebody like I really love when people suggest a prompt or like suggest doing something to a model that I can tell immediately will not work and is a terrible idea, but it wasn't obvious to them, and that's fascinating, right?
Do you
Like
have an
the
example? I would love to know if you have something that everyone tells you, but it's like a generation behind or something.
a lot of like I'd say like strategy ideation in fields that are new and competitive, right? So like if you wanted to have like an LLM like give you ideas for like what's a good LLM startup to try right now,
Oh
right? Like it's
yeah,
probably not
yeah.
going to, like tell you anything like, useful. Because some things like that where it's like the people are still figuring it out, and like there's money to be made in knowing how to do this better than the average person. You're going to get like mediocre advice on a lot of things, but that's not true for everything, right? If you ask it about physics, you're going to get like above average advice. It's but I think like people um, I think that people who have acclimated to models forget what it's like to be new to models, right? And I think that explains like a lot of like people in industry being like annoyed by how many R's are there in Strawberry, because like they're so
Fine. It's the tokenizer. We ignore the tokenizer whenever we
yeah,
can.
you're just and you see this explicitly. Like a lot of people are like they get like really enraged that they're like, you idiots, like why would you ever think this would work? Why did you ever think that you could ask it 9.11 is greater than 9.9 and it would give you a right answer, and so on, and like it they have a point. Like that was like the attitude for a long time. But I think the social context of these models is changing, and people, they want them to. It's becoming more reasonable to expect them to work well in these queries. There's practical consequences of these models being in the hands of people that don't know about these issues, and it's now suddenly more important to fix them.
Yeah.
Um,
This is a spin on this. Is Google searching going to become more like prompting, or is prompting going to be more like Google searching? Where like with a good language model, can I just type in like that physics equation that govern with the cross product that governs electromagnetism? Like is that the direction that the models are going, or is everyone going to actually become more conversational because AI is the default?
yeah, I think I mean Google search is maybe yeah, there's some similarities there. Like I think like Google probably has gotten simpler. Like I probably like I it's been a while since I've used most like advanced search filters in Google. Like I remember a point when it was extremely routine, like that
Yeah,
you
like
had
the
to just
plus
sort of
comma quote quote comma going
right.
thing.
And I think that kind of like speaks to the fact that like the results used to be worse, right? And we thought we were happier with them because like we didn't have alternatives, but like we just accepted that like, oh yeah, there's going to be like false positives in here that we now have to put in some negatives to cancel out. And that like skill, I'd say hasn't really become more important over time, right? Like it's now like it's occasionally useful still, but it's like it's less essential than it once was. And that's like mimics a lot of what we see in prompt engineering, that you don't have to understand like tokenization. I think is probably the biggest one. Like ChatML was like no small part of like why ChatGPT was such a big improvement to prompt engineering. It wasn't just the tuning; it was the fact that they came up with this more restricted system of interacting with a model that alleviates the need to know anything about tokenization. And that I think is like kind of an underappreciated change.
Yeah, I agree. I do think in the long term, prompting will go in the direction of Google searching, but I think I'm in some ways I'm not that surprised that something like O1 can exist, but it's still a very humbling moment where it's like we still have many times where there will be AIs released that we don't know how to use them, and this is the skill that you need to have is like tinkering, the open mind. It's like the open mind that things will come, and the open mind that things are not this what they are at face value. As I'm with, if you play with O1 a lot, you can definitely get things out of it that people on Twitter are not repeating over and over again.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think like the a lot of the explanation for I think so like the disconnect that you see in like that some people are just absolutely amazed with O1, and but also like most of the things you see on Twitter maybe aren't that impressive. I think that the frontier of problems that distinguish O1 from like say the previous class of frontier models, uh, it's it, it's either like unrealistic problems that brain teasers that people artificially constructed to to exhibit the difference, uh, or it's something realistic that you would never want to read in a tweet, right? Like the problems where it's succeeding on are like I have this extremely in the weeds like programming problem that involves in a complicated interaction of like all five of these files. Like please fix my import errors or whatever. It's like
Yeah,
those are the things that like that you're going to like uh see the most practical like benefit from, and those just like aren't like easy to communicate in a way that like they used to be. Like it used to be sort of like easy to make a screenshot of like, hey, look, it does this. It'll it will fix your broken JSON or whatever, and
yeah. Something else that I'm realizing I didn't put in the notes, but there's been these comments on O1 from the OpenAI people that they want to expose the ability to change how long the model thinks to the user. So to change its test time compute, um, that ultimately is going to be a whole other prompting thing. It's almost a little surprising that they're giving that to user. I almost think they should just make a classifier that does it for them rather than just assume the user is dumb. But being able to do it and change how hard your model thinks is a really interesting like real world prompting case because it doesn't really matter if you can get a viral example, but it's like how do you vary that knob in your day-to-day use that meaningfully ships your end product?
yeah, it's really like kind of comical, like trying to like manipulate like how long it thinks about things, because like there are some things that will make it think for a long time. Like I tried to get it to generate like acrostic word squares once, and like if you emphasize enough like the need to validate things, it will just like keep validating and failing, and and loop around for like I think I got up to like 3 minutes once. just like of attempting things before finally saying like, oh, I wasn't able to find one. Here's my best effort. But the other times though, like if you ask it, like I mean, I once gave it a prompt, or like I kind of just was, for the comedy of it, like I gave it like some simple problem, and then I gave it like literally like I think like 3 pages of emphasis on think forever. Just like rambling paragraphs saying like if you're even considering stopping, don't. If you ever have the dream, like if you ever get tired, don't worry about it, just keep going. Like all those kinds of like holy hand grenade style repetition. And after all this, it literally is just like thought for like 3 seconds and then came back and said like, I understand the urgency that you're saying here, but thinking forever just isn't possible, so I'm not even gonna try. Like, like
This is what I'm saying. OpenAI said they might give you a knob that controls this or influences it,
yeah,
which is
I think I that'd be I mean, I have to be honest. It feels like maybe weird UI. Like it seems like something that you should be able to just do through text. But I'd be happy to play with it. Yeah, because then steerability in general with O1 seems to be a lot of people I think are reporting that it's kind of awkward, or at very least at odds with like the really impressive examples that we're seeing coming out of it.
yeah. Yeah, there's a whole strategy discussion on why did they actually release it that I haven't really entered into. We can kind of avoid this. I am wondering how you view like prompting of agents. Is it kind of like the future section of like what is the future? Like how are agents going to be susceptible to prompting? I'm guessing after a conversation here, it's going to be like it's the same. And there's going to probably be a meaningful shift in who can deploy them and have success based on like who actually has this expertise and is doing this prompting work. And this could translate into like downstream business success, which is the first person to kind of crack an agent with the right model and the right prompt can have the first product that works.
Yeah, I think people mean like very different things when they talk about agents, right? Like sometimes, and I think like the big like division that matters is like that there's agents that are working in like self-contained, repeatable environments, so like a REPL sandbox, and then there's agents that are making changes in the real world, that they're out like making like retail purchases, canceling your subscriptions, so on. Like I'm very like optimistic about the former. I'm very skeptical of the latter. I think people underestimate like how much reliability is needed for like a lot of like real world decisions before you get to the point that you like trust the thing to like have the power to cancel your Hulu subscription or whatever. I think that also that in the first case there's a lot of untapped potential there, and I don't understand why we aren't seeing more iteration on that front, really. Like like ChatGPT's code interpreter when it came out, I think they renamed it to like advanced data analysis or something like that, which is um, not a good change in my mind. But
Same.
the code interpreter, like I love that. I still love it. It's a brilliant product, and I wish they kept going with it and improving on it. I'm also a fan of Julius AI, which kind of like goes exactly in that direction of creating like a code interpreter like environment where you can substitute in whichever model you want, and you can do things like install packages. Right, so like it's great for like one-off scripts where you want to say like I had a post once where I was pointing out like oddities in the longest GPT-4 tokens. Like one of them is like slash slash and then like 128 repetitions of like an equal sign or something like that.
Yeah.
And so but the way I did this was literally just like I just went to Julius. I said install TikTok and like show me the longest tokens. And I read the code like pretty carefully because I was going to tweak it. I didn't want to like tweet out something wrong. But it was right. And like I had like there were small things that I had to fix. But like it's good for like prototyping the kind of like these quick one-off things where you're just like
Yeah.
yeah, I could look up exactly like I roughly know how to use TikTok, and I just like didn't feel like figuring out the syntax again, right? It's sort of like it's good for just like the curiosities and like one-off stuff like that. And I think that's like what the future of this really is. Like I mean this really blew me away that there's like somebody posted on Twitter a video of their like 8-year-old daughter using Cursor, I think it was, and Copilot, and like this girl has no apparently has no like understanding of the code that's being generated, but she's able to say like, no, I want to do this differently. I want to have it, like have a Harry Potter spell here, and like changing the layout of like this like HTML JavaScript app, and it just works. And like that's like that's the future to me, right? That's the the hottest programming language is English, right? Like when you
Yeah.
see a little kid doing it, you really believe it. That now kids can like have the power to create software, and that's great because like we were at a weird local minimum of that, I'd say, of like kids being able to like have the creativity to like create their own interfaces or like make their computer do what they want. Like they're like less customizable now than they once were.
Yeah, my reflection on this is like the people who take prompting seriously are more likely to be in tune with what is happening in AI and at the cutting edge. But that also means that on the academic side and the public side for transparency and accountability, you have to like do some education work to make sure people are taking it seriously and or some normalization of claims, kind of depending on how people are presenting their work and using things. I think it's safe to say that all the frontier model labs are doing this, but kind of the long tail, it takes people time to learn these habits. But I've been it's easy it's like surprisingly hard to convince people to spend time playing with models too. Like I do it, but I should probably do it more, listening to people like you. Like I just it, it's funny. It's one of those things that like doesn't make sense how it'll pay off, but it probably will.
Yeah, I mean, there's no substitute for using models. Like people, I mean, I personally like I discover just like the dumbest things sometimes that make like the biggest difference. Like one of the most like high impact like ChatGPT tricks that I found lately is I have like custom instructions in my ChatGPT telling it how to think silently. And I have a tweet about this that I posted once. So if you Google like ChatGPT think silently, Goodside, you'll probably find it. Um, but I have the prompt here actually where I told it I was using its new memory feature, so it can like remember things that you tell it. So I was sort of showing that off at the same time. But I said to it, remember this: when I ask you to think or write silently, I mean for you to use your Python interpreter to write your thoughts as code comments or string literals assigned to variables. Code doesn't necessarily have to display any output, and then it remembers that. And so then I can say to it, silently write a brief essay about Super Smash Brothers, then silently translate this essay into French. Display only a double histogram showing the frequency of word lengths for both texts. And then it doesn't output anything until it has that histogram done, and then outputs the histogram and says, here it is. Right? Like, so and that makes such a big usability difference. If you just don't have to see what it's doing, if you can just like, like put it behind a fold, where you can, expand it if you need to, like be really sure that the code is right, or copy it to another editor or whatever. But like just not seeing it makes such a big difference. And
That's
like, and even just having things in code too, like because you can like you end up in this sort of like Jupyter like flow where you told it to silently do something, and now because you said to do that, it's not just in context, it's in a variable.
Yeah.
Right? Like so if it ever needs to do something in code, it will just have that variable there, and it doesn't have to repeat it, which could which is a big deal if it's say an essay, right? Like repeating an essay is expensive.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks so much for coming on. Anything else you want to plug or talk about?
I should have some content that should be going live around the time that this comes out on analyzing one for the Scale blog and talking a bit more about our coding leaderboard. So definitely look out for that.
Cool.
And also, other thing I should of course mention is Humanity's Last Exam.
I
We
saw
have
this.
recently partnered on an effort to solicit from the public examples of challenging problems, and we are giving out cash prizes. So definitely check that out if you're interested.
I had just tweeted a few days ago. I don't know if I put it on Twitter, but I put it on some platform. I don't have Twitter at work, so I end up looking at lame platforms I'm less addicted to. But like essentially, evaluation is going to be extremely expensive. And that was my whole take. And it's going to be very narrow and very hard. And then you like put out $500,000 in prizes. And the initial whiplash is like, oh, that's a lot. But in reality, I think that's the right ballpark. Because if you're going to make a good eval, you need to have somebody who's really good at AI, cutting edge AI, probably working on this at least 6 months to build a good eval. And that's a ballpark price. Like 500 grand is like a half year of how much it costs. Like this is with overhead and compute and stuff, is how much it costs to have somebody in AI like that. So obviously it costs more to actually build this evaluation, but like these numbers look ridiculous. But if we want to have evaluations that are meaningful, like this is what we need to do. And I think it's the right thing for Scale to do, to lead on evaluation. It feeds into natural things of their business. I think I've been on the record for this for a while. So I'm like, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people have like this, people outside the industry at least have the impression that like evals are, like grunt work, right? That this is there's something that you would use low cost labor for. It's not like a prestigious area, but like it couldn't be further from the truth. I think evals are very rapidly moving towards like the high end of intellectual ability that we're looking for like PhDs. I've done projects where it's like, okay, we have to get as many PhD educated poets as we can, to check the correctness of these iams in this poem or whatever, right? So it's those I think that's only going to continue, right? That we're going
Yeah.
to see that like at the low end, the value of human labor for training models is going to decline, and the value of high end intellectual labor is going to increase,
Yeah.
probably drastically.
It is like cost is probably a good proxy for evaluation usefulness. Like LM is expensive, but for different ways than the Scale leaderboard is expensive. And they complement each other very well. And they both become better by the others existing, by kind of like, okay, the models are in similar places, but they're showing different things, and you can separate between that. And I suspect that will change. Like that'll continue to grow. Some more will be at Scale, some more will be elsewhere, and that's just the new default for vals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things I'm most proud about like working on like our vowels and leaderboard work at Scale, is that we're contributing to this healthy ecosystem of of not having to just like trust one or two players, that of that vowels have been done correctly, right? Like we want to have more openness and more independent verification of vowels, and that's sort of our general theme, with work with like GSM 1K, and trying to make sure that we can actually trust what these leaderboards are saying.
Yeah, my one nitpick that I don't know how to answer, and I probably need more RLHF experts, you might know this, is like, are companies that buy data from Scale going to have an advantage on the Scale leaderboard because the distribution of humans that are doing not that the humans doing eval and creation are the same, but that they're drawing from the same pool of humans that are writing content or doing preferences, and then that are doing the evals. I think it's like too early to answer that question on if like human distribution matters, and for that reason, I think the eval is like still so much a net good. But it'd be really interesting to try to run those those experiments on like who is giving the data that you train on, and how does that then impact the evaluation.
Yeah, that's not something that I'm familiar with in enough detail to like comment on a process there. But yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. I think that's something
It's something that people like to complain about every possible thing, and I understand the root of the complaint, but it's like we've got to deal with the circumstances where we are in the AI industry, and the leaderboard is so much more useful than it is causing any problems. Let's keep doing it.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, I think we're like at time, so I'm gonna click stop here. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
Great, thank you so much.